That's a really interesting perspective because I think a lot of smaller, newer, less advanced agencies that aren't at that 7, 8 figure mark, I find that a lot of them are intimidated by sales. What would you share for them or for anyone in that level of growth that might help them?
I can empathize. The three founders of our agency, we were not natural salesmen. We were not trained with any sort of sales background. Obviously, we believed in ourselves. We believed in our product. We could get individual clients to share that belief in us, but we did not know what it was to be in sales. And I think that's a lot of where some agency owners come from if they're coming from the technical side. I would offer them a couple of pieces of advice. One is to just get over it. Like whatever hangups they have, like they just have to plow right through them because it doesn't matter.
Awesome. So jumping straight into it for, multi 7 figure, even 8 figure agency owners listening, what has been your most reliable or what has been the one growth lever that has made the biggest difference for you in growing your agency? All right, guys. Today I'm joined by Praj Murthy, co-founder and CFO of Doctor Multimedia, a San Diego-based full-stack medical marketing agency helping doctors, dentists, and med spas grow online. Since 2012, Praj has scaled Doctor Multimedia to over 30 million in revenue with a 50-person team, 3,500 five-star reviews, best-in-class SEO, and patient acquisition outcomes and strategies. He also advises at USF and hosts the Practice Growth podcast. Praz, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you guys having me on. Happy to be.
Awesome. So jumping straight into it for, multi 7 figure, even 8 figure agency owners listening, what has been your most reliable or what has been the one growth lever that has made the biggest difference for you in growing your agency?
Interesting question. For us, just the way that we did it, which is perhaps non-traditional, there was really never like a lever, if you will, meaning we never grew a big chunk at a time. It's always just been organic, one site, one client at a time. Obviously, you try to get as many of those as you can, but it really has been individual growth. I've certainly driven by sales, having a sales team, scaling that sales team, no doubt about that. But it really has just been brick by brick. So I guess to answer your question, it must just be consistency over long periods of time because there was never like one massive jump or leap other than maybe the very beginning. But it really just kind of never stopping the emphasis on sales. And then obviously, if you're going to run an agency, you have to retain those clients. You can't lose them as fast as you gain them. So really retention would be the other piece to scaling to. These days we're roughly 9-ish thousand, clients. So, but I don't think there was ever one big lever to pull other than just never stop selling, I suppose.
That's a really interesting perspective because I think a lot of smaller, newer, less advanced agencies that aren't at that 7, 8 figure mark, I find that a lot of them are intimidated by sales. What would you share for them or for anyone in that level of growth that might help them?
Yeah, so first of all, I can empathize. The three founders of our agency, we were not natural salesmen. We were not, trained with any sort of sales background. Obviously, we believed in ourselves. We believed in our product. We could get individual clients to share that belief in us, but we did not know, what it was to be in sales. And I think that's a lot of where some agency owners come from if they're coming from the technical side. So I would offer them a couple of pieces of advice. One is to just get over it, right? Like whatever hangups they have, like they just have to plow right through them because it doesn't matter what they're able to accomplish or outsource to their team. They, as the owner, are always going to be selling something to someone, right? It could be buy-in from your own internal team. We luckily didn't need financing, but if you do need to gather up financing, you're going to be selling there, obviously selling your actual services to your clients, selling on them to continue to be clients. I mean, it sounds trite, but I mean, it's true that as the owner, you are constantly trying to persuade someone. So on some level, at some point, you're just going to have to blast through that. Now, that could be by brute force and just by doing it over and over again until you're comfortable, or it could be more formalized. So that I think would be the biggest thing, is that to me, it's just a mental block. If you're actually intimidated by sales, I don't think you would be an agency owner, if that makes sense. So you might feel intimidated by sales, but I think deep down you're not, or you wouldn't take on the challenge of trying to build an agency. As far as the execution of sales, yeah, that's a whole different category where we all, including myself, have a lot to learn. Other than that, and one of the things that we did was we did reach that realization that we do need to bring in an expert. So probably when we look back at the trajectory, one of the big inflection points was bringing in our first salesperson, which we did not do as a startup, because how you got to pay salespeople, and we didn't have any money to pay them. But when we did make that leap, we certainly offered more money than we could realistically afford at the time, offered a nice compensation package to attract top talent. And then that shift, like, certainly a good salesperson is going to pay for themselves. So it's sort of a calculated gamble. But that shift to having one, then two, then four, then whatever, eight salespeople also helped us blast through, because I probably can't articulately explain how much being around those people made me more comfortable with sales. Just the things that I would pick up by being with them 24 hours a day or whatever when we're traveling on the road. I often feel like I learned to sell by just like osmosis of listening to them all the time. So it's twofold. Like, as it can be a little scary to take on a salary depending on the size of your agency, but if you're truly that intimidated by it, you certainly need an expert. But at the same time, you also need to be chipping away at that intimidation.
Burning the candle on both ends, it sounds
Totally.
like.
Yeah, because
Cool.
otherwise, I mean, and not to sound facetious, but if you love every other part of it, just go work at an agency. You can make like a great living, and you could have maybe an equity stake, or you could have residual income, right? So if there's nothing wrong with that, I don't mean that in a negative at all. But if you don't want to be in that side, there are options. But if you are either at the top or trying to scale, then by definition, you or the people immediately under you are going to have to do this. And I know you didn't ask this question, but one of the pitfalls that I saw was sometimes if an agency owner is too afraid of sales and they bring on a salesperson, they just get run over by that salesperson, right? They like don't have the ability to say no. They don't have the ability to put constraints on that person. And basically, the sales guy is the money, and then he runs the ship, and he's not going to run the ship like the owner. And then a lot of times you go belly up because you were just catering to that salesperson because you were so afraid of losing them that you just did whatever they said. And salespeople are obviously persuasive, and so they can talk into some bad decisions.
That's a really interesting perspective. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm curious, because you have a lot of experience in this. There's always that awkward stage where revenue's growing and fulfillment and sales are kind of at capacity. So for you guys and for others that are like at that, multi-million dollar or, multi six-figure mark, at what point did you really find that it was a bottleneck and you had to bring somebody in?
On the sales side or the other side, or
Yeah.
both?
Well, actually both, right? Because it's like in order to scale sales, you have to be able to also scale fulfillment, right?
Absolutely. So, and again, our story, I don't know how traditional or not. I'm always curious to hear other perspectives. But for us, it was kind of multi-pronged. So, one, we run into bottleneck on the fulfillment side constantly, right? Like that's kind of the goal, is that we're trying to stretch our customer service side as far as they can go so that we know we're not bringing on waste there, in terms of trying to fulfill, and then have the opposite problem. So, I feel like everyone on our customer service side probably does the job of one and a half to maybe two people. And it's stressful and it's a lot of work, but it's by design, and they get the rewards and the compensation, accordingly. So to us, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure it feels difficult in the moment. That is where I do think having an agency owner that likes the other side of it, that likes the fulfillment side, really does help. Because if you're scaling correctly, when you kind of run into a little bit of trouble as owners or leaders, you should be able to like drop down and help ease that fulfillment, right? So luckily, I don't have to do it that much anymore, but I do remember days when, like, oh man, this department's so backed up. let me just like roll up my sleeves, get in there and just like help them unclog it. Right. And then that causes a couple of domino effect type things, but not the least of which is that they see you're willing to like be in the trenches with them. And that sort of reduces that like overwhelm that some employees feel and then just freak out and, and the whole thing breaks. If you're just calm and like, hey, we just got to do the work. Let's go. Let's just start and not stop until we're done. So I think there's that side of it, which is a much easier problem to handle. Now, to answer your question more directly, when we did hit that inflection point and leveraged all of our, money on sales, the way we had to get through that was our first salespeople did have to do fulfillment as well. They were like the origin of some of what's now its own department or its own, team was actually at the very beginning. They had to do both because there simply wasn't the ability to have both, right? It wasn't, I can't pay you 2x market value as a salesperson and then also give you 3 people under you to do all the work. So obviously it takes the right personality type that's coming in, seeing the rewards, understanding kind of what's being asked of them. But that was our only way through. And then as sales scaled up and it became obvious that they should spend more of their time doing that, that's kind of what opened the door for the fulfillment side to come in and say, hey, let's take this off your sales plate so you can sell more and more. But at the beginning, they were really tied together, and probably not at the multi-million-dollar mark like you described, but if you're a little bit smaller than that as an agency, there are huge selling points to having your salespeople be involved in the fulfillment, right? It really gives the sales team an advantage if they've bought in, because when they're selling a prospect, they can explain that they're going to still be there versus when you go against a company of now our size, we can't make that promise. That salesperson is not going to be part of fulfillment because we couldn't operate like that. So I guess if we're trying to find like a soundbite out of all of that, when you're in those moments, you can take what are perceived disadvantages and flip them into like value propositions or your competitive advantage. So yeah, an agency owner might be like, wow, you don't have enough staff to fulfill your sales orders. And we might say, well, hey, your salesperson is going to be with you through the whole fulfillment process. Like, where else are you going to get that level of customer support, and the longevity of relationship? And if they're buying the salesperson, now we're really like a couple steps ahead. So, and then you figure out the rest as you go.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that's gold because especially in the agency space, churn is such an important metric and just important piece. And so to
Mhm.
have early on someone that is not only doing the selling, but also handling white glove that client through the process to really keep them on, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean,
What
oh, sorry. Just to piggyback off on that, like you said, churn is pretty much like everything when you talk about scaling your agency because it's going to determine the rate that you can scale. And so having our salespeople be actually financially invested in retaining our clients really helps. When we started, the way that we had to do it was with no contracts, everything month to month. That was one of our competitive advantages. So obviously the huge risk there is that you can drop clients for no reason at any time. And so we needed basically everyone in the company from top to bottom to realize that like we're investing heavily in sales, which means we all have to heavily invest in retention. And that has to just be a top priority. And if it starts with that salesperson, like you said, it makes it so much easier where if they desperately don't want to lose a client, it'll sort of trickle down, all the way through.
that makes a lot of sense. And just out of curiosity, what in that role what did you guys call that? Like, what was the title of the role? Was it account manager? Was it sales rep? Was it client success manager? Like, how did you guys label that?
Yeah, so in reality, it's all of those things that you mentioned. What I noticed was that our salespeople kind of naturally wanted a non-sales title when they were reaching out to prospects, right? So that it's not too salesy. So they kind of inherently landed on like marketing specialist. Account manager, I think, would be a generic version if you're not specifically in marketing, but basically some kind of specialist in their field, and they were going to do that whether we called them that or not. So once we observed that, we're like, well, great. If you are selling yourself as a marketing specialist, well, then you better do some of the marketing, on the other end, and that'll tie everything together. So these days, they do have more traditionally defined sales roles, but I think they still tend to not use those titles to not come across too salesy to prospects.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I am curious, Praz, you have partners in the agency, correct?
Yes.
What would you say for someone that's, just trying to get to the level of success that you're at currently? What would you say they should be thinking about in terms of partners, or maybe not even going that route?
Yeah, it's interesting. I only have the one experience. So, maybe someday I'll be able to compare having a partner and not having a partner and the differences. But if I'm imagining it, I'd say a couple of things. I'd say if we're talking about this being a long-term business and something that you're going to keep either for a while or, be the bulk of your life's work, then that partner is probably the single most important decision you're going to make, possibly even more than like your life partner, right? So the like really taking that decision seriously and saying like, if this works, that's when you're in startup mode, that's what everyone wants to dream about, right? Like, oh, I really hope this works, but a lot of times we don't think about what's going to happen if it actually does because it's such a low probability. But if it works, the amount of things that are going to be tied up in that partnership, in that friendship, whether that's like a deep friendship or a very, superficial friendship, the way that you guys are going to grow over the years, and the directions your lives are going to pull and families and all that. Like there's a lot there. And, some more traditional businesses might, like my dad is a doctor and he had a practice for many years and he did have a partner. But like that's the two of you showing up to work every day in a small space, like you living, like there's a lot of assumptions that are made if you're going to go in partner with someone in a local small business like that. But when we talk about scaling an agency, a lot of people want to do it because they think about freedom, the ability to be anywhere, the ability to work their own hours, have residual income, blah, blah, blah. And those are all wonderful things. But if you and your partner or partners are not on the same page about what that looks like for each person, that can cause incredible tension. Let's say you want to move and work remote, and their expectation was that everyone was going to stay put in the same city. Like that could potentially crumble, everything. So that's all just an example of that decision is not one that I would make lightly or for quick financial purposes or like I said, bringing in that salesperson because you think that they're going to unlock everything. And then all of a sudden you've made them a partner in the business and things like that. So I think you have to really kind of understand that and make sure everyone is on as much of the same page as possible, just as a baseline for this to be a good idea. I'm sure I don't know the stories, but I imagine there are countless horror stories of trying to build an agency with a partner and then that goes sour and the agency would have done great, but the partnership is what failed. If you get past that, or if you have no choice, and you're in a situation where you just have to bring on a partner, then I would say you're really looking at what I hope are complementary skill sets, maybe even opposite skill sets is fine. In my experience, like two partners that are really good and bad at the same things is not a very ideal setup, and so it's easy to be friends, right? Because you understand each other so well and you're like, you really connect, but at the same time, that's not necessarily going to serve you well, especially as you look to grow and scale. So understanding that like it's okay to have a weakness, like not to go on too much of a tangent here, but I feel like in our current partnership I can have the weaknesses that I have because I have a partner that's going to compensate for those. If I didn't have that partner, I would really need to be shoring up those weaknesses or potentially acting different. And so kind of the way that I look at it in maybe a little more of a feel good sort of way is that I can be myself because I have a partner that can be himself and we allow that for each other. Like it's the existence of the other one that allows us to be true to who we are. If we didn't have each other, we'd have to both act more like the other one and we'd have to balance that out. And that can kind of limit your ability to truly just lean into who you are. So a lot of benefits, but a lot of very significant pitfalls. And then, like I said, I think maybe the thing people don't think about the most is if this works, dot
What
where
if?
it's gonna be. Yeah. So if you can't, much like you would with hopefully with a life partner, right? You're like, when you're getting married, you almost assume you're going to be together forever, and you project over the course of an entire life. And the expectation is that both partners are going to kind of push and pull and compromise as you go through life together. But that's kind of the assumption. Strangely, I don't feel like that happens all the time in business, where people aren't necessarily conceding that they're going to might have to give up some things that are super important to them to make the partnership continue to work.
That makes a lot of sense. And coming from someone who has a successful partnership, I think is extremely valuable. How is an eight-figure agency like you guys, like yourselves, leveraging AI to stay competitive in today's marketplace?
Yeah, this is a question I think about, around the clock at the moment. So I'd say the truest way is we're actually looking right now for people that want to specialize in this space and come in and lead that charge within our agency. We think it's that important that we're kind of like inventing, a role for it. But as a precursor to that, we have taken all the readily available tools, whether that's ChatGPT or posting. Basically every tool that anyone sells us now has some AI component linked into it. And for us, our goals are simple, like make the work go faster or make it more accurate, and or reduce the headcount that we need. So there's definitely some tension there when you talk about our staff, because the one of the tasks you're giving them is to make them, I don't want to say less valuable, but to reduce the reliance on, people in those positions. We try to explain to them that it's more about limiting future hires than it is necessarily about getting rid of current hires. But I think that's really the what it's providing for all of us. So yeah, definitely an open question of how can we truly tap into this at our size. But at a ground level, I'm trying to make sure that all of our staff knows to like embrace these tools and use these tools to make their own work like go faster, be more manageable, be more accurate. Because if they're using it at the ground level, then we really are leveraging it in some capacity, even if we don't like necessarily have fully automated tools. And not to ramble here, but I'm trying to instill in them that one of the best ways that they can make themselves valuable in the age of AI is to become good at using those tools and overseeing those tools. And then as an agency owner, that's, I don't want a bunch of AI agents that I then have to like check all their work and figure out what's going on. So if they're using AI and they're managing it, then they become more valuable to me as the agency owner. And I wouldn't want to get rid of that person. But if they don't embrace it and they just keep doing the base level work, now there is an opportunity for them to get replaced. And, that's kind of a hard thing for them to think about, but I think it's reality.
I think that's a great place to end here, Praz. Thank you so much for your time and the wealth of knowledge. Where can people find you or learn more about either your agency or any of the things that you spoke about here today?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thanks again for having me. It's been a fun conversation. So our agency is Doctor Multimedia, drmultimedia.com. The doctor is all spelled out. Feel free to learn about us, kind of see our origin story, etc. If you are in the medical marketing space, then hopefully you just naturally bump into, our clients and our work these days. And then, of course, my name's Praj Murthy. You can find me, online or there are products. My contact information is readily available. Feel free to share it with your audience. I'm always happy to, chat or to participate in things like this that are going on in the world.
Awesome. Thanks, Praz.
Yeah, absolutely.